Welcome to the Introduction to Plants video lesson. In this lesson, we'll discuss the definition of plants, what makes a plant a plant. We'll also discuss how all plants reproduce by the process of alternation of generations. And we'll get the classification of plants into different categories that plants are placed within. Let's go ahead and get started. Plants are eukaryotic, differentiated autotrophs. Let's take that one word at a time. Eukaryotic, or a eukaryote, means that the cells contain a nucleus. Differentiated means that they have specialized cells that are unique in structure and function. And of course, you already know that to be an autotroph means to make their own food. All plants reproduce by the process of alternation of generations. That means they alternate back and forth between a haploid generation, in which they are a gametophyte, which produces gametes by mitosis, not meiosis, and a diploid generation, a sporophyte, which produces spores by meiosis. Most often, the two generations look nothing alike, although they're the same species. This would be analogous to, or in other words, similar to, humans being the sporophyte. Our eggs and sperm would leave our bodies and grow into a multicellular organism that looks nothing like humans. Then those creatures mate with each other and give birth to the next generation of humans. So this is what it would be like if humans performed alternation of generations, which of course we don't. All right, now let's take a look at two diagrams. And on your diagrams, everything that's labeled here and circled needs to also be done on your diagrams during this discussion. Let's start with the diagram on the left. This just shows the alternation of generations within the cells themselves. Okay? And we start with the sporophyte, which is a multicellular diploid organism. That means it has two N, the genetic material in it, which will undergo the process of meiosis. So in the top half here we have the diploid generation, and the bottom half here we have the haploid generation. In meiosis, haploid spores are produced. They undergo mitosis and produce what's called a gametophyte, a multicellular haploid organism. They go this undergoes mitosis and produces what are called gametes. Then the male gametes and the female gametes undergo a process called fertilization. That process produces what is called a zygote, and this would of course be the diploid organism. The zygote then undergoes mitosis and becomes the sporophyte. I like this diagram over here on the right even better, because it shows you more accurately using a flowering plant, an angiosperm, the process of alternation of generations. Let's start with this sporophyte, which is the flower, what we call the flower itself. And these are all labeled steps 1 through 7. In the flower, we have microsporangium, which are produced in the anthers, the male reproductive organs in the flower. More on this to come later in another lesson. And we have the megasporangium that produces that are in the ovaries, which is in the pistil, which is the female reproductive organ in the flower. They undergo process of meiosis, and the megasporangium becomes a megaspore, and the microsporangium becomes the microspore. The megaspore becomes the female gametophyte under the process of mitosis and produces an embryo sac. The microspore also undergoes the process of mitosis and produces the male gametophyte, which is the pollen grain. the egg in the embryo sac, and the sperm in the pollen grain then come together under the process of fertilization. They produce a zygote, which is diploid. This produces a seed, which then grows into the next sporophyte. Okay? And it grows under the process of mitosis. So again, similar to this diagram on the left, this top half right here is the diploid generation, and this bottom half down here is the haploid generation, alternation of generations. Let's now take a look at the classification of plants, and we'll start with green algae. Green algae are thought by some to be protists, and then by others to belong in the plant kingdom. They are unicellular, and here are some different close-ups of some different types of green algae. Another category of plants are the non-vascular plants, called the bryophytes, of which the mosses are a good example. They have no vascular tissue. They must use diffusion, which you learned about earlier, for all transport. That means materials moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. And because they're non-vascular, this limits their size, and so they are all very small in size. The opposite of the bryophytes are the tracheophytes, the vascular plants. They have vascular tissue. We have the seedless vascular plants, such as the ferns and horsetails. These use spores to reproduce. And we have the gymnosperms, which produce seeds without flowers. And the most common example of the gymnosperms are the conifers, are evergreen trees, like your Christmas tree. We also have the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. And with the angiosperms, we also have two categories. And one are the monocots. And characteristics of monocots are plants that have parallel veins. They have flower parts in multiples of 3 and produce one seed leaf, which is called a cotyledon. Great example of a monocot that you would be familiar with is corn. A corn plant is a monocot. And of course, the other kind here would be dicots. They tend to have networked veins in their leaves. They have flower parts in multiples of 4 or 5. And when we say flower parts in multiples here, we mean things like their petals, for example. And then they have 2 seed leaves in their seeds, which again are called cotyledons. So the dicots have 2 cotyledons, and the monocots have 1 cotyledon. All right, I've thrown a lot at you here. Let's take a look at another video that will help hopefully bring all this together for you.